Sarah C. Bedford joins me most Fridays to review the week that was in Congress. But Sarah, you got a big vote today. The NDAA is going to make it to the floor, the National Defense Authorization Act. It's got aid to Ukraine in it. It's also got a rider that bans the Biden administration abortion policy for uniformed military. Is it going to pass?
I think it's going to be really difficult because you have Democratic leadership coming out and saying, don't vote for this because of, like you mentioned, the abortion policy, the limiting of federal funds for transgender care for troops, for their families, the limiting of some DEI training that is paid for by federal dollars. So there's a lot of stuff in there that Democrats don't like. But then you also have Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene who are coming out and saying they're not going to vote for it because funding for Ukraine is left in the NDAA, and there are conservatives who don't approve of that. So it's hard to see where McCarthy's going to find, the 5 or so votes that he needs to get this over the finish line.
Is Marjorie Taylor Greene pro-abortion?
Definitely not. She's not.
Okay, so I do not know how anyone who calls themselves pro-life votes against this because it solves the problem. It will go to conference. Tommy Tuberville can get out of the hole he dug for himself and stop holding up uniformed military career people promotion, and it will go to conference if they vote for this. So they got the vote they wanted on Ukraine aid. They lost overwhelmingly, right?
Yes. That one.
So
that wasn't a really close one.
It wasn't close. I mean, the Republicans overwhelmingly favor aid to Ukraine. So do the Democrats. So they got the abortion. They got the ban on DEI. I'm not quite sure how the DEI ban works. What's in that, Sarah Bedford?
There was a more strongly worded one that Matt Gaetz, an amendment that Matt Gaetz tried to attach to the NDA that got voted down. The one that did go through, I believe, just limits some of the training for DEI, de-emphasizes it, and the federal funds that go out for contracting with third parties, for example, to provide DEI training, but it doesn't totally gut every part of the Pentagon's efforts. It's interesting. I was reading the Washington Post coverage of this morning, and they quoted, 4 or 5 Democrats' arguments before they even got to a single Republican voicing concerns about the NDAA. But a lot of the Democrats were saying, this is Republicans' war on diversity. They don't care about, including people of color in the military. I don't think that's really what the amendment language says. Republicans just don't want federal funds going towards liberal-leaning training.
Well, it can be unconstitutional if they do, but that's for the courts. Sarah, what I don't understand is I read all the coverage of the vote coming up today. It was my understanding from Congressman Roy and others' public statements that if the Republican Freedom Caucus types got the votes on their amendments, they would support the final bill. And so you're telling me Marjorie Taylor Greene has broke that deal. Are there 4 others to break it? Actually, I don't know how many Democrats are going to vote against the national defense. I really don't. That's a tough vote.
There might be some Republicans that cross the line, and there are some undecided still. Thomas Massie, for example, has come out and said, even though he's voted against NDAA every year, he said for I think like 10 years, he's an undecided now because of all of the priorities that Republicans were able to get into the NDAA. So there's still a chance. And from McCarthy's standpoint, I don't think that he really could afford another disaster from the conservatives' perspective, like the debt ceiling deal, even though that really was the best deal he could have gotten from Biden. That sort of shook the relationship a little bit between McCarthy and the Freedom Caucus. I think he really needed to shore up trust with them again by allowing them to vote on all of these amendments and get some of them in the NDAA, even if it imperils its passage on this first try.
So they did get what they asked for, votes on amendments. They lost those votes, and now if they shoot this bill down, they are voting against the national defense. I just don't see them doing that. But I go to the Democrats, though. Democrats are really going to vote against the NDAA on the floor. I know what Hakeem Jeffries said. I know that there's some abortion absolutists. But are they really going to put abortion rights for the military to travel ahead of the national defense, Sarah?
That is going to be one of the most interesting things, I think, about the vote today, because as you mentioned, the argument now that Republicans can make right back at Democrats is that to vote against the entire national defense authorization bill just because it won't pay for service members to cross state lines to get abortions. It's a policy, honestly, that really affects a very small number of troops in a handful of states. And, to discard the whole bill because that's in it, I think is going to make Democrats look bad. So that you could have some moderate Democrats in battleground seats who still vote for the NDAA because of that.
I think any Democrat who votes against this is asking to get to lose their seat in a tough election year. Last question. Christopher Wray got beat up pretty badly, Sarah. I mean, really badly. Is he going to show up again ever? Because, I mean, there's no answers for these questions after the cocaine non-investigation.
Yeah, I think what we saw there was his sort of a bureaucrat, right? He came across really very much like a company man, just following the FBI handbook to the letter of what he could and couldn't say, which made him look not transparent at all. It wasn't a good look, but at the same time, I'm not sure that any Republican really laid a glove on him in terms of making him look bad or tripping him up. He I think frustrated a lot of Republicans by how
I have to disagree on that. I think if you talk on robotically about what you can and cannot answer, you lose. Sarah C. Bedford on Twitter. Good to see you, Sarah, with the Washington Examiner. I will see you again soon.